an original in a silent way. This to me is one of my favorite records of all time, and this was the soundtrack to the late '60s, to my late '60s, which tells you how weird my late '60s were. But this was like one of these records where you get into that groove where this record starts, and you go off to this place that Miles is putting together with these other people. And this was engineered by Stan Tonkel and Russ Payne. It's a great sounding record, and it's just got a great groove to it, and it goes to great play. Of course, Bitches Brew is equally good, if not more outrageous. But there's something about this record that reminds me of my life at where was I? I was on 1404 Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, Massachusetts. And that's the great thing about vinyl. I tell youngsters, when you have these records, if you stream everything, it's floating by and it's gone. I pulled this record out. And this is the record. This is the one. I bought this in Boston. I moved to LA with it. I played it in LA. I moved back to Hackensack. I moved to New Jersey. I played this record. It's really meaningful to me. And the reissues from Mobile Fidelity are fantastic too. In fact, I put the Mobile Fidelity Miles Davis albums in my list of the best reissues of the last decade, that they were able to get these tapes and process them really well, all analog, and put out the Miles catalog, which I've got some of them here or some of them in the other room.
Those are incredible.
And you can get them, and apparently they sold okay, but not as great as they should have sold. And that's just stupid. Really stupid. The Quartet records, or the Quintet records, actually sound way better than the original. Something happened at Columbia's mastering suite, and it wasn't going back to the Columbia curve. It was some other issue that they didn't sound very good. I don't know why. And I kept listening to them. What is wrong? Something's wrong. The MoFi reissues sound much better and actually sound fantastic. And they're not sold out. It's stupid. So you should get those, because even if your taste is not into jazz now, maybe if you're young and you're watching this, as you mature, maybe you'll get into it, and then those records will start getting really costly. So I recommend those. Modern Jazz Quartet. I love the Modern Jazz Quartet. It's one of my favorite groups. A buttoned down kind of sophisticated classical jazz, and I have almost all of their records, and I love them. So all I can say is I love the sound, the percussive sound that they make. You know, it's vibes, it's piano, it's bass, it's all percussion, and yet it's very melodic and it's and they're very thoughtful guys. And this is an early pressing. This was recorded in Scandinavia. They dare not say what country it was, in April of 1960. So this is recorded when I was 13 years old. And Lee Friedlander did the photography, and Lee Friedlander did a lot of covers. I believe he did the cover, a very famous cover of Concert by the Sea, Errol Garner. I think he did that cover. And interestingly, that record, when it got reissued, I wrote something about that record, and someone got in touch with me whose parents were on the cover of that record. And this whole long story was just amazing coincidences. And these connections are, I wrote about that on my website. Anyway, I love this record. It's a great recording. It's got it's like you're sitting in the balcony, maybe. It's very clear. It's not close up, but it's very clear, and it's spacious, and you see the guys on the stage, and it's I love it. I could play this record, and I do. I have like 4 copies of it, and this is an original Atlantic.
What are a couple other Modern Jazz Quartet records you like? Because I
like Pyramid. I like Sonny Rollins, the one with Sonny Rollins at the music in Massachusetts. I like The Sheriff, but I've got a lot of them.
All right, just curious.
I like the one with Gunther Schuller where they have strings. It's interesting. Not my favorite, but I like it. This is Antonio Carlos Jimmy, the composer of Desafinado Plays. And you see, it's got my sticker on it. It's got my Dymo label tape on it. So I had this in my dormitory in '64. And this is Klaus Ogerman's arrangements, which were so lush that if you have diabetes, you'd have an attack. Recorded by Phil Ramone in New York, May 9th and 10th, 1963, Creed Taylor production. I bought every record in this series, in this Verve series, Getz Gilberto, Louis Bonfa Gilberto, Jazz Samba, every one of the records in this Verve series, because they were all incredibly well recorded, and they all were fun to listen to, and it made you feel sophisticated and adult. And I always said, if you play this record and you can't get laid, you have a problem. And what's amazing about, I used to say that like in the 60s, Katie Lang was quoted more recently holding up this record and saying, if you play this record and can't get laid, something's wrong with you. So, at least as far as that goes, we're on the same page. I still love this record. It's, Joe Beam is playing one note. He's playing one finger note, and it's so sensual. And then these strings are behind it, and it's just like, every copy of this I can find, I buy, just to have extras. So this is Thelonious Monk Orchestra at Town Hall, and Monk had mostly a quartet with maybe a couple of extra guys coming along as guests like Sonny Rollins. This was a bigger assemblage of people and very unique. So it's got Donald Byrd on trumpet, Eddie Byrd on trombone, Phil Woods on alto sax, Charlie Rouse on tenor sax, Pepper Adams on baritone sax, Robert Northern on French horn, Jay McAllister on tuba, Sam Jones on bass, Art Taylor on drums, and so it's a core group plus all these extra brass people and reeds. Recorded in concert February 20th, 1959. And 10 cents. That's what I paid 10 cents for it. And it's an original Riverside, and it's in pretty good shape. Slightly chewed, but you know what? Mono records. You can play a mono record that looks totally chewed up and it'll play perfect. I mean, literally perfectly. I've got a copy of Phil Spector's Greatest Hits on Phillies Records out there that looks like somebody, cha-cha'd with golf shoes on. And I bought it just for the cover, and because it was an original, I thought it was cool. When I played it, it totally blew my mind because it sounded perfect. And the top end is all there and no pops and clicks. It's incredible. And this record's very, very good for 10 cents. Plus, it's a very unique Monk record.
What is it about some of those mono pressings regarding what you're saying that can even look bad and still sound so great? Is the groove walls, the way they're cut?
It's because you're only playing the horizontal modulation. There's no vertical modulation, and so there's no. If you have a mono cartridge or a stereo mono switch on your phono preamp, that cuts out all the noise and crap. It's much easier. And then people say, well, you have to have the authentic 0.7 mil or 1 mil stylus to play them back correctly, but that's really nonsense, because if you use a more severe stylus profile, you can get further down in the groove, and maybe you'll get to a place where the old record player never got to, and you'll literally avoid all that nonsense, all the wear that happened above, and I have proven that on occasion. Anyway, what's interesting about this record, it says a high fidelity recording, audio compensation RIAA curve, even though it's mono. Because, and this is 59, it was right around 58 when the switch to stereo happened that everybody adopted RIAA, even though you'll go on the internet and people say, oh, I got into a fight with some guy last week. Oh, what you said is because they were using the FFRR curve, and they were using the Columbia curve, and they were using the RCA's new orthophonic curve well into the 1960s. I've got some Columbia records from the 70s, stereo records, that if you put on the Columbia curve, it sounds much better. I said, if it sounds better, it's because you're using that as a tone control. It's not because the record was cut with that. Yeah. There's a guy who makes a very nice phono preamp in this business, who has a list of what curve you should use for what records. And he's got Prestige, you want to use one curve. Blue Note, you want to use a different curve. Rudy cut them both. on the same lathe. What are you talking about? You're out of your mind. And I did get a hold of a guy, an older veteran from Columbia Records who cut records in the 50s. And I said to him, there are people that claim that Columbia used their own curve well into the 60s and 70s for some of their records. And the guy said, "What are they doing? Smoking crack?" That's just what he said to me. But there are still people today making that argument. And they're out of their minds. There are also people that say that British Decca and London records cut in the UK with the same numbers are different. And that the Londons and the Deccas use the FFRR curve. It's the same cutting engineer. It's the same lathe. It's the same everything. And I spoke to one guy, an old guy, George Betty's. He must have passed away by now because I spoke to him probably in the 1990s. He was one of the original cutting engineers at Decca. And he said, we switched to the RIAA curve as soon as stereo came out. Everybody did. Everybody did. And as far as the Deccas and the Londons, they're the same records coming off the same presses. The only difference is the label that gets slapped on them. But there are still people out there, and you can find it on the internets, that will insist that the Londons and the Deccas are different, and if you play them, they sound different. Okay. That's all I have to tell you, and I hope you enjoyed this walk through my record life, which in a lot of ways is my life. And I'm perfectly content with that.